Hello, beautiful souls. I am Ellen Holmes, also known by my spiritual name, E-Light. I'm an Ascension coach and spiritual business strategist. I've worked with some of the most influential leaders in the field of science, politics, spirituality, and ufology upon the planet. And I'm here to assist you in your multidimensional awakening and in coming home to the kingdom's consciousness. I went for a Kundalini awakening in 2013. And I've been on an epic journey of spiritual adventure and awakening ever since. I've spent much time traveling around the world, studying with different masters, ancient healing modalities. I've lived with gurus and swamis in India and Buddhist monks, in ashrams, in Buddhist ashrams, also yogic ashrams. I'm a Kundalini yoga teacher. And I've also lived in Peru with shaman, studying the mystical arts, where today I combine the most powerful healing techniques and modalities that I have uncovered along my journey to assist you in your multidimensional awakening and in coming home to the wisdom of your soul and higher self and highest timeline. So my spiritual awakening began in 2013, following my Kundalini awakening. Now, often people ask me about my awakening, what it was like before, what the awakening was actually like, and also what unfolded following this. And so I grew up in the mainstream British matrix, and I did my best to fit in. I grew up in an environment that didn't support my multidimensional abilities, the natural abilities that I was born with, and that so many of us are born with. And as a result of the mainstream British matrix, my abilities were shut down at quite a young age. I would be told that the spirits I saw in my room, or the fairies, or the flashes of clairvoyance that I would have that then came true, was my imagination. And so I gaslit myself to such a degree where I shut off from my spiritual abilities. And I do believe this also led to a lot of trauma. Had I been spiritually empowered in my abilities at a young age, it would have been a totally different story. But hey, that's what we're here to do. We're here to clear the way and pave the path forward to the kingdoms, and so the younger generations, they don't have to go through that kind of repression that we went through. And so I went through several traumatic events as a child and as a teenager that basically stacked up on me. I didn't really know or understand trauma growing up. And as a result, I had no way of dealing with things that I was going through. I was abused, very badly abused, and I had Stockholm syndrome as a result. And for the first part of my life, the way I dealt with the challenges that I went through, I would run. I was a runner. I was a very competitive runner, and it was very, very quick. I specialized in the 800 meters, and I had my sights set on the Olympics. I was one of the fastest in the country for my age group. And that was how I transmuted the heavy energy when I was younger. Also through the arts, I was very gifted in the arts, and I really enjoyed the creative arts. It was another way in which I really moved through the challenges that I experienced prior to my awakening, until I reached about 16, where those ways of dealing with the things, the challenges that I would experience, the abuse that I would endure, they were no longer a way in which I could deal with the trauma. And I actually got injured at 16 following a life-changing trauma that happened just before my 16th birthday that, in essence, blew up my timeline and led to me basically spiraling into self-destruct, where the spirit of suicide first began to follow me. And I then turned to drink and wild, reckless partying as a way to deal with the trauma. And I really went deep into the darkness. And so I became very rebellious from the age of about 16 up until 19. And I went into self-destruct until I hit rock bottom at the age of 19, where I began to think of ways to take my own life. And thank you to God, I was gifted with a very beautiful family. I've got 3 younger brothers who were my inspiration in those times to find another way. I never feared death, and I always believed in God, although I didn't consider myself a Christian, and I still don't consider myself a Christian. I like to study with all the different spiritual religions, or as I prefer to call them, spiritual schools of God. I had turned my back on God because of the Christian conditioning that I had been through. I'd always believed in reincarnation. And as a young child, I'd expressed this to a parent who had told me that I wasn't allowed to believe in reincarnation because I was Christian. And as a result, I actually turned my back on Christianity and on God, because I always felt a calling to be free, to spiritually explore and discover, but Christianity didn't allow me to do that. I had a lot of questions that Christianity didn't answer that really would frustrate me, such as, what about all the other religions? And how did Jesus do what he did? And what about before Jesus? I had all these questions that went unanswered by Christianity, and as a result, I turned my back on Christianity and on God. However, I always believed in God, and I always believed in life after death, and I would sometimes have visions from beyond this lifetime and previous lifetimes as well. As a child and throughout my teenage years growing up, there was this innate knowing that there was more, and the nature of that was spiritual. However, I didn't have anybody supporting me in that spiritual exploration, so it wasn't a door that I opened. It was a door that was really feared, if anything. I remember when I first went to go see a psychic, I was terrified to tell my family out of the fear of what they may say. I didn't tell anybody. I did it all in secret because I was terrified of the judgment and the exclusion and everything that came with exploring that spiritual world. And so anyway, at 19, there I was, rock bottom, dark night of the soul, thinking of ways to take my own life. And as a result, I decided it was actually more painful to cross over to the other side and then watch the implications that would have on my brothers' lives and the lives of my parents than to actually find another way upon the earth. And so I got down on my hands and knees and I prayed to God to save me. I prayed for God to send me some angels. And what unfolded is really one of the most amazing experiences of my whole entire life. It was the beginning of my spiritual awakening, where over the period of about 4 months, I went through a Kundalini awakening. My Kundalini awakening was one of the most amazing times of my whole entire life. The first part, I thought I was dying, so it wasn't so amazing. I was having incredibly vivid, lucid dreams and experiences and sleep paralysis, where I would go to bed at night and my whole body would be vibrating, and I thought I was dying. And then this all came to a head one night just before Christmas. I had returned back to my parents' house after being in university. I returned home for Christmas. And I had started meditating over that previous month. And I'd started also reading Angel Tarot. And I'd started doing mantras. This is my second day in a row doing mantras that I'd found on the internet. Just before I went to bed, I'd do these mantras. And I went to bed that night and I found myself in sleep paralysis once again. Only my whole body was vibrating more vigorously than ever before. And I was there like, oh my gosh, my parents are going to wake up because I must be vibrating so hard that they're going to hear the bed moving. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be paralyzed for the rest of my life. What have I done? And I remember hearing this voice from deep within me, this voice of wisdom that had been speaking to me my whole life, but I had ignored it a lot of the time, the voice of my higher self. And it said, trust in the divine. And then I saw each of my chakras light up one by one. I saw my Kundalini rise until it reached my third eye. And I saw this huge eye open. And that was the last thing I remembered before I woke up the next day. I think I must have just passed out vibrating. And I remember I jumped out of bed And I ran across the room and checked my face in the mirror, happy that I wasn't paralyzed. That was my first thought. And then I sat down upon the bed like, whoa, what happened last night? It was like I had finally found the door that I had been searching for my whole entire life. I didn't know what the chakras were at this point, and I didn't know what the Kundalini was either. It wasn't until about a year later when I met the first Kundalini master on my journey that he described the Kundalini awakening, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's what happened to me. But following this event at the end of 2013, I went back to university, and in January of 2014, my spiritual awakening accelerated. And this is where my multidimensional communication really upgraded. And the angels were the first to communicate with me. They stepped in and they guided me on the path of self-healing, where at the time, even following the Kundalini awakening, I was still struggling at times with depression. And so the first thing that the angels, they guided me in doing was focusing my mind in a more positive direction. They said, we want you to become the most positive person that you know. And to get out of this depression, you've just got to go all in. Focus your mind in a more positive direction. Be grateful for everything that you have because you've got so many blessings in your life. Let's go for it. Your whole life could be completely different and unrecognizable 6 months down the line. And so I followed through on their guidance and I began to watch my whole life transform. And so people often ask me about those first initial communications. Now, this isn't something that I have really shared too much about, but I am beginning to share more about because it is such an amazing experience that I had. The initial communications with the angels took place through my computer, where I would plug in to the radio. Also, sometimes it happened through my phone where I'd be listening to music. And the angels would drop in and the line would go fuzzy and it'd go shh, and then they'd speak to me. And we would have these full-on conversations. And this went on for about 2 to 3 months. And it was one of the most amazing experiences of my whole entire life. When it first started happening, I thought I was going crazy. But it was so divine, the light that was shone for me and the guidance that was given to me as I began to apply it and I began to watch my whole entire life beginning to transform. I was like, there's something here. And so this went on for about 2 to 3 months. And it was so beautiful. The first time it happened, I was there just like bawling my eyes out. It was like being on the phone to God is the best way I can describe it. Like literally a clear line to God. It was amazing. And yeah, there were many conversations that occurred in this time. But after about 2 to 3 months, they said, we can't continue to communicate with you in this way. You're going to have to learn to communicate with us organically without relying on anything external to us, because I was relying through going through a computer or through my phone where they would come in that way, where they guided me inwards. And so they said, meditation is the path to purifying your channel and being able to establish this consistent multidimensional communication. And so I was quite sad when these communications stopped, but it was so amazing, this experience that I had been through. It was like the purest love that I had ever experienced in this life was shone for me. And it was like, I have to have more of this. And so I went on this quest to reconnect and to rediscover multidimensional communication. And so I really went deep into personal development. I began meditating every single day. I began running again, taking up athletics and sports, and I began to pray. I actually also went vegan. I first went vegetarian. Well, I first went pescatarian, and then within about a month, I went vegetarian, and then within about 3 or 4 months, I went vegan, and I really began to ascend through the food. And so I really went deep into the personal development, and this was all happening in the first 3 years of my awakening process. And I began to hear more clearly through my meditation the angels, and this is something that has only continued to develop as the years have gone on. And then I left university, and a whole journey opened up of synchronicities. I wanted to go to Mount Shasta because I had heard it was a chakra of the earth. I heard it was a vortex, and I wanted to go discover Mount Shasta. And so I was there one day Googling chakras of the earth, only to discover one of the most amazing chakras upon the planet, one of my favorite to this day, one in the UK, is Glastonbury. And so I decided to take a trip to Glastonbury for the first time, just after leaving university. And I met a soul family there. And this opened up a whole new path for me, where following this meeting that I went to in Glastonbury, I was invited to an ayahuasca ceremony. I did my first ayahuasca ceremony, which was deeply transformational. And so I did this ayahuasca ceremony, and this really awakened a lot for me. It was really the beginning of my second big awakening, where I was shown so many things. I was shown how the planet is awakening in these times due to astrological cycles, and how this next level of our human evolution is known as Christ consciousness, where our divine love and light is flooding the earth. And there is nothing that we can do to stop this divine love and light from coming. And we are required to raise our vibration to move through these times with greater ease. And I was shown Jesus. This is where I really began to heal my relationship with Jesus, is through Mother Ayahuasca. I was shown how Jesus was a master who had come to the earth, embodying Christ, demonstrating to us our human potential and preparing us for this next level of our human evolution, coming home to Christ consciousness within, where we are to become like Jesus Christ. And so this was my second big awakening. My first ayahuasca ceremony is also when I began to channel light language. And I continued to awaken following this ayahuasca ceremony over the year that followed. And beyond, that first ayahuasca ceremony, I'm still learning things from. It's quite amazing how the medicine works. And so following this ayahuasca ceremony, I was guided to Barcelona. And actually, ayahuasca was guiding me. She goes, okay, now it's time to travel. And I was guided to the place of Barcelona, which is a very synchronistic unfolding of events. Everything was very synchronistic following ayahuasca. It was like synchronicity after synchronicity after synchronicity. And I went to Barcelona. I met my business partner, and we co-founded a company, an events company in Spain, and we created the Ufology World Congress. The Ufology World Congress is an international congress that is focused on unifying politicians, scientists, and spiritual leaders to uncover the wisdom and truth of life from the stars. And so I went into this whole galactic initiation from end of 2016, 2017, beginning of 2017 onwards. And I have had so many galactic experiences ever since. My spiritual journey accelerated from then. And, going into the galactic world of ufology has been a whole process within itself. Ufology is a very interesting topic where you have both the light and the darkness that come together. And so I've had both good experiences and bad experiences with extraterrestrial beings. And by all means, the bad experiences have really deeply sculpted me into somebody who is so much stronger and more self-aware than I was before. I had to learn how to defend myself astrally. Following the first Ufology World Congress, I began to receive many attacks, and I went into my second dark night of the soul. And I felt so very alone because I had nobody to speak to, nobody who would understand me. And this was a beautiful time at the same time, because in that darkness, the only way through was to come home to God within. And I really deepened my spiritual connection to God through the darkness. I awakened to greater light, and I decided to go to India, and I went to live in a Buddhist ashram and study in meditation. And I met masters in India, and they taught me all sorts of mystical teachings that really assisted me in learning how to psychically protect myself from the dark forces who didn't want me to be doing this work in ufology, shining light on all this information that's been hidden. And so I learned defense against the dark arts, one of my specialities. How to not be shaken by the darkness is a very, very important skill to learn. And I don't ever get attacked anymore. And if I do, it's just like they bounce off me. And with this, I've been called to uncover what I do believe are the most powerful healing techniques and forms of protection one can awaken to. And in a nutshell, that is becoming one with the Spirit of Christ. There is no greater protection that I have uncovered along this journey than the Spirit of Christ. And I've got many stories where I can demonstrate this, but we'll save that for another time. And so whilst I was in India, I had many, many beautiful experiences and encounters. And this is where I first awakened to the dragons and the coming kingdoms of God. And so when I was in India, I was living in Dharamsala, which is home of the Dalai Lama. It's a very, very beautiful place. And there was one day I was really feeling down. I was letting conspiracy theories and human drama really get me down. I was feeling really depressed and anxious and alone. And I was walking through the forest and I had an experience that changed my life forever. This is really my third big awakening. My first was the Kundalini awakening. My second was the Ayahuasca awakening. And then my third was the awakening to the kingdoms. Interestingly, they're about 3 years apart, 2013, 2016, and then 2019. And so I was walking through the forest and I encountered for the first time 2 gigantic white dragon elder beings. And up until this point, I didn't believe in the dragons. One of my soul brothers, he was always talking about the dragons. And I was always like, okay, didn't really understand it. But in this awakening to the dragons and in turn to the kingdoms as well, the best way I can describe it is it was like my oversoul, the wisdom of my soul and higher self stepped in, and a remembrance from beyond this lifetime took place. Well, I was walking through the forest and I heard this purring. It's the best way I can describe it. It was kind of like this breathing that sounded like purring. And I was like, oh my gosh, is that a bear? I'm in the Himalayan pine forest, alone. Is that a bear? I was like, no, I don't think it is a bear. And I kept on walking. And then I hear this voice. What have we here? And I froze, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And I continued to walk slowly. And then I felt their presence. And it was so powerful. I dropped to one knee and I placed my hand upon my forehead, which is a sign of respect in India. And I said, dragons. And then I was like, what? I don't believe in dragons. What? And there were these 2 giant white dragons that emerged through the ether. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I said to the dragons, do you mind me being here? And they said, no, we're smitten. Come sit with us. And there was this giant rock that I sat on. And I sat with the dragons for about 2-3 hours until sunset. And the dragons, they healed me in ways that I had never anticipated was possible. I was sharing with them all of the anxieties, the pains and the worries and fears, and the human drama that was weighing me down. And they said, why are you letting yourself get caught up in all this silly human drama? Can you not see what is coming? And they brought my awareness to the horizons. And I saw the kingdoms of God emerging through the ether. And through bringing my awareness to this vision, everything that I had been experiencing, all those heavy, dense human emotions, it was like they were lifted and transmuted directly into light, directly into love. And I felt liberated in ways I had never experienced through simply bringing my awareness to the vision of the kingdoms. And the dragon said to me, a time is coming where humanity will be required to come together and work together as one human species. Your problems are other people's problems. Their problems are yours, because you are all one. Welcome home to the kingdom's consciousness. And so I sat with the dragons until sunset, and then I realized I had to leave because it was getting dark. And so I ran down the mountain, and the dragons, they flew with me, and I was seeing them in the shadows and through the rocks. And oh my gosh, they continued to travel with me from beyond the Himalayas from that moment forward. And I even had a psychic soul brother, very, very psychic, gifted soul, say to me, you have a white dragon on the top of this house that's followed you from the Himalayas. So that was a divine confirmation. But the dragons, they have been such a beautiful beacon of light and guide for my awakening to the kingdoms, which has become a huge part of what I do. I specialize in the full body ascension process. And so I'm a sacred geometer, and I've been doing the sacred geometry ever since 2014. And I specialize particularly for the sacred geometry in the light body geometry. So the geometry of the DNA, the geometry of the macabre, and of crystalline consciousness. And so I'm also a Kundalini yoga teacher. The Kundalini is a powerful life force that resides within us, where we rise our Kundalini up through our crown and expand into our macabre light body. And so our macabre, it is like our vehicle of ascension to the kingdoms. And so when I am speaking of the kingdom's consciousness, there are two key areas that I'm here to assist in activating. You have the full body ascension work, and then there is the vision of the kingdoms where we are ascending to. But equally, the kingdoms, they are within. And actually something Jesus said is the kingdoms of God, they are within. Another thing he also said was the kingdoms of the Father are spread out upon the earth, but people do not see them. And you can understand this through the wisdom of the fifth element that humanity became disconnected from at the fall of Atlantis, that we are now reawakening to in our ascension as we are moving into 5D, as we are ascending, as we are returning to love within. And so the dragons, they are masters of the 5 elements. They can walk on the earth, they can swim in the water, they breathe fire, they fly in the air, and they also have ascended with their body into the ether. And so they are incredibly powerful guides for these times, and in assisting us in returning to the kingdom's consciousness. Now, often people think dragons are bad, but there are many different types of dragons, just like we have different types of humans. We have different types of dragons. The dragons I connect with are giant white celestial dragons, and they are so beautiful, so divine, really beautiful guides to work with. And so I'm going to be speaking more about this in the upcoming Porthole to Ascension Glastonbury event. And I'm super excited because Glastonbury is such an important and powerful planetary vortex that is also directly connected to the dragon consciousness. The dragons, they also come with the giants. And there is an ancient history of dragons and giants within the UK, around the planet. But one of those keynote points of activation and remembering the dragon wisdom is within the UK. There's a reason why the Welsh flag has a dragon. The stories of the giants and the dragons, they can be found throughout the British mythology. I believe the legends of dragons and giants are rooted in truth, passed down throughout the ages, this ancient remembrance. And so I'm super excited to be going back to Glastonbury this year for the Porthole to Ascensions event. I was there last year in 2023, and it was incredibly powerful. And people would come from the town who didn't know the event was happening. They'd be like, what's going on here? We feel the energy of what you guys are doing. The energy is much higher than before. Like, what's happening here? And so it's an incredibly powerful event that we're going to be doing this September in Glastonbury. And I want to invite you to also make sure you book your ticket sooner rather than later, because it did sell out last year. So you don't want to miss out, because it is super special. We have many light workers coming from all around the world to unify and to come together in this event. Old souls who have connected in other lifetimes. It's a very powerful place to meet Soul Family. You can get your ticket at the link in the description. And I look forward to seeing you there. I'm sending much love from my heart to yours all the way around the world. And I look forward to seeing you in Glastonbury.